Part 1. The Sacrifice. The prison world of Vexar-7 floated in the darkness of space like a forgotten nightmare. It was a place where the Corinthian Empire sent those they wanted the galaxy to forget. The facility held thousands of prisoners from dozens of different species, all kept in chains and darkness. The Corinthians had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, and they ruled through fear. Margaret Hayes walked through the medical wing with tired steps. She was 67 years old, and her gray hair was pulled back in a simple bun. Her uniform was clean but worn from 40 years of use. The lines on her face told stories of countless lives she had tried to save in places like this. She had been a prison nurse for most of her adult life, moving from one facility to another, treating whoever needed help. She didn't ask questions about why prisoners were locked up. She didn't take sides in galactic politics. She just healed people. That was her job, and she did it well. But today everything changed. The uprising in Sector 9 had been violent and quick. A group of prisoners had managed to steal weapons from a careless guard. They had tried to break free, fighting their way through 3 cell blocks before being stopped. 15 guards were injured. 23 prisoners died. The warden was furious and needed someone to blame. Margaret had treated the rebels after they were captured. She had cleaned their wounds and set their broken bones. She had given them medicine for their pain. To her, they were patients. To the guards, this made her a traitor. 2 guards grabbed her arms as she was finishing her shift. She didn't resist. At her age, fighting back seemed pointless. Margaret Hayes, the captain of the guard, read from a datapad. His voice was cold and mechanical. You are charged with providing aid to rebels and conspiracy against the Corinthian Empire. Your sentence is death by combat. You will be placed in cell block Omega Cell 7 with prisoner X771. The other guards laughed. Some of them looked away, unable to meet her eyes. They all knew what Cell 7 meant. They all knew about the dragon. Margaret felt her heart beat faster, but she kept her face calm. She had learned long ago that showing fear only made cruel people crueler. They dragged her through the prison's dark corridors. The lights flickered overhead. The walls were covered in scratch marks from desperate prisoners. She could hear screaming in the distance and the sound of heavy doors slamming shut. The air smelled like rust and chemicals. Cell block Omega was in the deepest part of the prison. It was where they kept the prisoners too dangerous to be anywhere else. The temperature dropped as they descended. Margaret's breath came out in small white clouds. The guard stopped in front of a massive door. It was made of reinforced metal, covered in dents and scorch marks. Warning signs in 12 languages covered its surface. Most of them said the same thing: extreme danger. Do not open. Lethal force authorized. Last words, old woman? The captain asked. He was trying to sound tough, but Margaret could hear the nervousness in his voice. Even the guards were afraid of what was behind that door. I've lived a good life, Margaret said quietly. I helped people. That's more than most can say. The captain nodded to the others. They opened a small slot in the door and pushed Margaret through. She stumbled and fell onto the cold floor. The slot slammed shut behind her, and she heard the locks engage. Then she heard the guards walking away, their footsteps echoing down the corridor. The cell was dark, almost completely dark. Margaret sat up slowly, her knees aching from the fall. She could feel the cold seeping through her uniform. The air was thick and hot despite the cold walls. It smelled like smoke and old blood. She heard breathing, deep, heavy breathing that rattled like stones in a metal drum. Something massive was in here with her, something that was trying to decide whether to kill her quickly or slowly. Margaret's eyes adjusted to the darkness. She could see a shape now. It was huge, at least 12 feet tall. Chains stretched from the walls to the creature's body, embedded in its flesh. She could see scales that looked black in the darkness with hints of deep red, wings broken and bent at wrong angles draped along its back, and eyes. Golden eyes that glowed with ancient rage and pain. This was the dragon. This was prisoner X771. This was a Varathian, one of the last of his kind. The guards had told stories about him. They said he had killed 17 guards who got too close. They said 23 prisoners had been thrown in here as punishment, and none of them lasted more than an hour. They said the dragon was a monster, a killing machine that felt nothing but hate. But Margaret didn't see a monster. She saw a patient. Her trained eyes scanned the creature, noting the infected wounds where the chains entered his body. She saw the way he held his left side, protecting broken ribs that had never healed properly. She saw the slight tremor in his limbs, the sign of constant pain that never stopped. You're injured, Margaret said. Her voice was steady and calm, the same voice she used with frightened patience. Those chains have been cutting into your circulation for years. The infection must be terrible. The dragon's eyes widened slightly. Then he roared and unleashed a jet of flame directly at her face. The heat was intense, stopping just inches from her skin. It was a warning. It was a test. Margaret didn't move. She didn't scream. She just looked at him with tired, kind eyes. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said. "I'm not here to mock you or torture you. I'm a nurse. I help people who are in pain. That's what I do." She reached slowly into her uniform pocket and pulled out her medical scanner. The guards had searched her, but they had missed this. It was old and small, easy to overlook. "My name is Margaret," she continued. "I've been treating prisoners for 40 years. I've seen every species in this galaxy. I've treated soldiers and criminals, saints and monsters. And right now I can see that you're suffering." The dragon stared at her. He hadn't heard words like this in so long. 200 years of captivity. 200 years of pain and darkness and guards who laughed at his suffering. And now this small old human woman was offering to help him. His name was Kareth. He had almost forgotten that he once had a name. To the guards he was just X-771. To the other prisoners he was the dragon. But once long ago he had been Kareth, son of Vareth, warrior of the Varathian clans. "Why?" His voice came out like grinding rocks. He hadn't spoken in years. "Why do you care?" Margaret smiled. It was a sad, weary smile. "Because somebody has to. Because even in a place like this, kindness matters. Because you're in pain and I can help." She held up the scanner. "May I?" Kareth didn't answer, but he didn't stop her when she slowly stood up and walked toward him. Her hand shook slightly from age or fear or cold, he couldn't tell. But she didn't run. She didn't beg for her life. Margaret scanned his wounds carefully. The data made her wince. The chains weren't just restraints. They were connected to his nervous system, designed to cause constant agony. They were also suppressing something in his biology, keeping him weak. "This is torture," she whispered. "This is designed to hurt you as much as possible without killing you." "The Corinthians are good at torture," Kareth said bitterly. "They have had 3,000 years to perfect it." Margaret looked at the chains, then back at her scanner. She couldn't remove them. She didn't have the tools or the strength, but she could treat the infections. She had some medical supplies hidden in the lining of her uniform. Not much, but something. "I can't free you," she said honestly, "but I can clean these wounds. I can give you medicine for the pain. It won't be much, but it's something." Kareth looked at this strange old woman. She should be terrified. She should be begging or screaming or trying to fight. Instead, she was offering to help him. It made no sense. "They threw you in here to die," he said. "Yes. You know I've killed others who were put in this cell. I know. You're not afraid of me?" Margaret thought about that question. "I'm afraid of dying. But I'm not afraid of you. You're not a monster. You're just someone who has been hurt very badly for a very long time." Something broke inside Kareth. Not his body, but something deeper. A wall he had built around himself to survive. This human, this weak and fragile creature saw him as a person, not as a weapon, not as a monster, as a person. "You may try to help me," he said finally, "but I do not know how long you will live in this cell. The guards will not let this continue." "Then we'll make the most of whatever time we have," Margaret said. She began to work on his wounds, carefully cleaning the infected areas with the few supplies she had. Kareth watched her in silence. Her hands were gentle and skilled. She hummed softly as she worked, an old Earth song he didn't recognize. Outside the cell, the guards watched through the cameras. They were confused and disappointed. Why hadn't the dragon killed her yet? They took bets on how long she would survive. Some said 1 day, others said 3. None of them guessed what would really happen. None of them understood that in that dark cell something was beginning, a friendship that should have been impossible, a bond between two beings who had every reason to hate each other, and a change that would shake the entire galaxy. Margaret finished treating the worst of Kareth's wounds and sat down against the wall. She was exhausted, but she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. "Tell me about your people," she said. "Tell me about the Varathians." And in the darkness, Kareth began to speak. Part 2, The Impossible Bond. 3 days had passed since Margaret was thrown into the cell. She was still alive, and the guards couldn't understand why. They watched the camera feeds, confused and fascinated. The old woman and the dragon were talking. Actually talking like two people sharing stories over coffee. Margaret learned that Kareth had been a warrior but also a father. He had a daughter named Sareth, who would be over 200 years old now if she still lived. He had been captured during the last great battle between his people and the Corinthian Empire. The Varathians had refused to surrender, refused to become slaves, so the Empire had decided to destroy them completely. They told the galaxy that we were monsters, Kareth said. His voice was still rough, but it had lost some of its anger. They said we killed for pleasure, that we destroyed worlds for fun. They made us into demons so no one would question our extinction. Margaret listened carefully as she changed the bandages on his wounds. The infections were getting better. The swelling had gone down. Kareth's breathing was easier now, but that wasn't true, she asked. No, we fought for freedom. We refused to kneel to anyone. The Corinthians couldn't accept that. They couldn't allow a species to exist that wouldn't bow to their empire. Kareth's golden eyes grew distant. We knew we would lose. We were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, but we chose to fight anyway. Better to die free than live as slaves. Margaret understood that feeling. She had seen it before in countless prisoners. The desperate need for dignity, for meaning, even in the face of certain death. I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry your people suffered that way. Kareth looked at her with something like surprise. You apologize for something you didn't do? Someone should apologize. And since the people responsible never will, I suppose it falls to the rest of us. Over the next few days, Margaret told Kareth about her own life. She talked about Earth, a planet the Corinthians had discovered only 60 years ago. Humanity had been shocked to learn they weren't alone in the universe. They had been even more shocked to learn they were considered one of the weakest species in the galaxy. Humans are fragile, Margaret explained. We don't have scales or natural armor. We can't breathe fire. We're not particularly strong or fast. The Corinthians looked at us and saw prey. But you're still here, Kareth noted. We're stubborn, Margaret said with a small smile. That's probably our most dangerous trait. We don't know when to give up. She told him about her career as a nurse. She had joined the Interstellar Medical Corps when she was 25, eager to see the galaxy and help people. She had worked on colony worlds, battleships, and prisons. She had seen the best and worst of every species. Why prisons? Kareth asked. Why spend your life in places like this? Margaret was quiet for a moment. Because prisoners are still people. Because everyone deserves medical care no matter what they've done. And because someone needs to bear witness to the cruelty, so that maybe someday it can be stopped. Kareth understood then why this small human woman had shown him kindness. It wasn't weakness. It was strength of a kind he had never encountered before. On the 5th day, Margaret made a discovery that changed everything. She was running another scan on Kareth's wounds, checking his progress, when her medical scanner picked up something strange. The neural suppressors in the chains, the devices designed to cause constant pain, were malfunctioning. Not breaking down, but being rejected by Kareth's body. She ran the scan 3 more times to be sure. Each time, the results were the same. Kareth's cells were adapting to the suppressors, developing a resistance. His body was evolving countermeasures in real time. This is impossible, Margaret whispered. I've never seen anything like this. What did you find? Kareth asked. Margaret showed him the scan results, explaining what they meant in simple terms. Your body is fighting back against the chains. The suppressors that should keep you weak and in pain, they're not working as well as they used to. You're adapting to them. Kareth felt something he hadn't felt in 2 centuries. Hope. Does this mean I could break free? Maybe eventually. Your body is changing, but it's slow. It could take years. Margaret studied the data more carefully. But if you can adapt, maybe others can too. Maybe there are more Varathians out there surviving in places like this. The thought was almost too much to bear. Kareth had believed himself to be the last of his kind for so long. The possibility that others might still live, that his people might not be truly extinct, it was overwhelming. Margaret continued studying the scans. She was a skilled medical professional, and she was beginning to understand something important. The Corinthian Empire had ruled for 3,000 years because they believed they were superior to every other species. They had better technology, better weapons, better tactics. But they had never faced a species that could adapt and evolve as quickly as the Varathians apparently could. Then she noticed something in her own medical readings. The scanner automatically monitored her vital signs as well, and there was an anomaly. During the first day in the cell, when Kareth had breathed fire at her as a warning, she had inhaled some of the superheated gas. It should have damaged her lungs. The scanner had recorded the damage. But now, 5 days later, her lungs were completely healed. Better than healed, actually. They were stronger than before. Margaret ran the scan again, checking her own biology more carefully. What she found shocked her. Her body had adapted to the environment of the cell. The cold temperature, the poor air quality, the stress, her cells had responded by becoming more efficient, more resilient. The healing was happening at an accelerated rate that should have been impossible. She had always known that humans healed well compared to some species. Earth was a dangerous world, and humanity had evolved to survive injuries and illnesses that would kill more delicate creatures. But this was different. This was adaptation happening in days, not generations. "Kareth," she said slowly, "I think I understand something now. Something important." She explained what she had found in her own scans. Kareth listened carefully, his sharp mind understanding the implications immediately. "Your species adapts like mine does," he said. "The galaxy sees humans as weak because you have no natural weapons. But you have something more dangerous. You survive. You change. You overcome. Earth is a death world," Margaret said, using the Corinthian term. "Everything there evolved to be as dangerous as possible. The predators, the diseases, the weather, even the plants are toxic. Humans survived all of that. We're not weak. We're just survivors." Kareth looked at Margaret with new understanding. The Corinthians had made a mistake. They had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy, always choosing those that seemed powerful and threatening. They had ignored humanity because humans appeared harmless. But now Kareth could see the truth. Humans weren't harmless at all. They were just patient, and they learned from everything around them. "The Empire fears species like mine," Kareth said. "Species with claws and fire and obvious strength. But they should fear your kind more. Because you're the kind of species that watches and learns and adapts until you can't be beaten." Margaret hadn't thought of it that way before. She had spent her whole life thinking of humans as underdogs, as the weak newcomers to a hostile galaxy. But maybe that had always been the wrong way to look at it. Maybe humanity's greatest strength was that no one expected them to be strong. The guards continued watching through the cameras. Some of them were getting worried now. The old woman and the dragon were clearly becoming allies. That shouldn't have been possible. Nothing survived in Cell 7. Nothing made friends with the dragon. Commander Thex, the warden of Vexar 7, studied the footage carefully. He was a cruel man who had bought his position through bribery and blackmail. He had spent 20 years running this prison, making profits by selling prisoners to research facilities and weapons manufacturers. He saw Margaret's medical scans, saw the data about adaptation and evolution, and he saw an opportunity. On the 7th day, Thex visited Cell 7 personally. The door opened and light flooded into the darkness. Margaret and Kareth both looked up, squinting against the brightness. Thex stood in the doorway with 6 heavily armed guards behind him. "Margaret Hayes," Thex said. His voice was smooth and pleasant, which somehow made him more threatening. "You've accomplished something remarkable. You've survived a week with the dragon. More than that, you've gained his trust, and what do you want?" Margaret asked. She didn't stand up. At her age, she had learned to save her energy. "I want your research. I want the data you've collected. I've seen your scans. I know what you've discovered about Varathian and human adaptation. That information is valuable. Very valuable," Kareth growled, a deep rumbling sound that made the guards step back nervously. Thex ignored him. "Help me extract that data. Help me understand how this adaptation works, and I'll release both of you. You can go free. You can leave this place." Margaret looked at Kareth, then back at Thex. "And what will you do with that information?" "Sell it, of course. There are many groups who would pay well for biological data like this. Weapons manufacturers, research corporations, perhaps even rebel groups planning to fight the Empire. You'll weaponize it," Margaret said. "You'll turn our biology into tools for killing." Part 3. The Arena. The first attacker was a Krell, a species known for their thick armored shells and crushing strength. He charged at Kareth with a roar, moving surprisingly fast for his size. The other prisoners spread out, trying to surround them. Margaret pressed her back against Kareth's side. Her heart was racing, but her medical training kept her focused. She had studied the anatomy of dozens of species. She knew where they were vulnerable. "The Krell," she said quickly. "The joints between his shell plates, under his arms and behind his knees, that's where you need to hit." Kareth moved with speed that shocked Margaret. Even with his chain still embedded in his flesh, even with broken wings and centuries of torture, he was still a Varathian warrior. His clawed hand shot out and caught the Krell's arm. He twisted and struck exactly where Margaret had indicated. The Krell's arm broke with a crack that echoed through the arena. The prisoner screamed and fell back. Two more came at once. A Sindari, a species with 4 arms and venomous claws, and a Thros, covered in thick fur and razor-sharp spines. Margaret's mind raced through her medical knowledge. The Sindari, watch for the venom sacs in her wrists, don't let her scratch you. The Thros, his spines are hollow. If you can break them off, he'll bleed out quickly. Kareth breathed fire, forcing the Sindari to dodge. Then he grabbed the Thros by 2 of his spines and yanked hard. The spines broke free with a spray of purple blood. The Thros howled in pain and collapsed. The Sindari tried to circle around for Margaret, but Kareth's tail swept her legs out from under her. His foot came down on her wrists, crushing the venom sacs before she could use them. The other prisoners hesitated. They had expected an easy fight. The dragon was supposed to be weakened by his chains. The old woman was supposed to be helpless. But they were working together, and working well. A group of 5 prisoners decided to rush them all at once. Margaret recognized species from 3 different star systems. She shouted warnings and weak points as fast as she could identify them. Kareth moved with brutal efficiency, using his claws, his tail, and his fire. The chains that bound him weren't long enough to let him move freely, but he had learned to fight within their limits. Margaret wasn't just spotting weaknesses. She was predicting movements. Years of watching patients move, understanding how different bodies worked. It all translated into combat awareness. She could see when a Drexian was about to lunge by the way his muscles tensed. She could tell when a Yarvax was going to strike by the angle of her stance. Left side coming high, Margaret warned. Kareth blocked without looking, trusting her completely. His counterstrike was perfect, but there were too many of them. And Margaret was only human. She was 67 years old, tired, and unarmed. When a desperate Corinthian prisoner broke through Kareth's defense and lunged at her with a broken piece of metal, she couldn't move fast enough. The blade, covered in a paralytic toxin that Corinthian weapons often carried, cut deep into her arm. Margaret gasped at the pain. The paralytic should have dropped her within seconds. It was designed to shut down the nervous system of most species almost instantly. But Margaret didn't fall. She stumbled, felt the numbness spreading, and then felt something else. Her body fighting back. The same adaptation she had seen in her scans was happening in real time, accelerated by the stress and danger. Her cells were identifying the toxin and developing resistance faster than should have been possible. Kareth killed the Corinthian with one brutal strike, then turned to Margaret in alarm. "You're injured." "I'm fine," Margaret said, and she was surprised to realize it was true. The numbness was fading. The wound was bad, but not as bad as it should have been. Her body was already working to heal it. "Keep fighting. I'm not done yet." Kareth saw the determination in her eyes, and something shifted in his understanding of humans. This wasn't just stubbornness. This was something built into their very biology. They were survivors in the truest sense of the word. The remaining prisoners saw Margaret stay standing after being hit with a paralytic blade. They saw her continue to guide Kareth's strikes with calm precision, and they began to understand that they had been tricked. This wasn't a fight they could win. Thex had sent them to die. One of them, a Vexian named Kor, dropped his weapon. "No, I won't die for his entertainment. The warden lied to us. We're not walking out of here no matter what we do." Another prisoner, a young Drexian female, nodded. "He's right. This is execution, not a chance at freedom." The fighting stopped. The prisoners who were still standing backed away from Kareth and Margaret. Some of them sat down right there in the arena, exhausted and bleeding. Others tended to the wounded, giving up on the fight entirely. Kareth kept his guard up, but he didn't attack. "Why do you stop?" Kor looked at him with tired eyes. "Because we're tired of being tools for cruel people. Because that human of yours is right. We don't have to become monsters just because we're treated like monsters." Up in his observation room, Commander Thex watched the arena with growing fury. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The prisoners were supposed to tear each other apart. Instead, they were giving up, refusing to play his game. He activated the arena's defense systems. Hidden panels in the walls slid open, revealing automated weapons. Energy cannons charged with a high-pitched whine. "If they won't kill each other, I'll kill them all," Thex muttered. In the arena, Margaret heard the sound of the weapons charging. She looked up and saw the cannons emerging from the walls. "We need to move, now." But there was nowhere to go. The arena was designed to be inescapable. The doors were sealed. The walls were too high to climb. They were trapped. Kareth looked at his chains. He had been wearing them for 200 years. They had become a part of him, a constant source of agony that he had learned to endure. But Margaret's scans had shown that his body was adapting, that he was changing, that maybe, just maybe, he was ready. He roared and pulled against the chains with every bit of strength he had. The metal groaned. The anchors in the walls began to crack. His scales split where the chains entered his flesh and blood poured down his body. The pain was unimaginable, but Kareth had endured unimaginable pain for centuries. What was a little more? Margaret saw what he was doing. "Stop. You'll kill yourself. Better to die free than live in chains," Kareth growled. It was what his people had always believed. It was what they had died for. The energy cannons fired. Bolts of superheated plasma shot across the arena. Prisoners scattered, diving for cover behind debris. Margaret threw herself flat against the ground. The air filled with the smell of burning metal and flesh. Kareth didn't dodge. He couldn't, not while he was pulling against the chains. The plasma bolts hit him directly, burning through his scales. He roared in agony but didn't stop pulling. The chains were breaking. He could feel them giving way. Margaret couldn't stand watching him suffer. She ran to him, dodging plasma fire, and grabbed one of the chains. Her hands burned where they touched the superheated metal, but she pulled anyway. Her small strength added to his massive power. Other prisoners saw what they were doing. Kor jumped up and grabbed another chain. The Drexian female joined him. One by one, prisoners who had been trying to kill each other moments ago were now working together, all pulling on Kareth's chains. "Pull!" Margaret shouted. "All together!" They pulled. The walls cracked. The metal shrieked. And then, with a sound like thunder, the chains broke free. Kareth staggered forward, truly free for the first time in 200 years. His wings, broken as they were, spread wide. Blood dripped from the wounds where the chains had been embedded, but he was standing. He was free. The automated weapons swiveled toward him. Kareth took a breath, deeper than he had been able to breathe in centuries, and unleashed fire. Not the weak jets he had managed while chained, but a true Vorathian flame. The weapons melted under the assault. The arena filled with smoke and heat. Thex, watching from above, scrambled to activate emergency protocols. This couldn't be happening. The dragon couldn't break free. It was impossible. But it had happened. And Kareth wasn't done. He charged at the main door, the one Thex had used to enter. His claws raked across the reinforced metal, leaving deep gouges. The door was strong, but it wasn't designed to withstand a fully powered Vorathian warrior. Margaret organized the other prisoners. "Anyone who can fight, help him. Everyone else, stay back and tend to the wounded. We're getting out of here." The prisoners responded to her natural authority. She wasn't the strongest or the most dangerous, but she was the one who had helped Kareth, who had shown kindness in a place where kindness didn't exist. They trusted her. Together, Kareth and several of the stronger prisoners battered at the door. It took 5 minutes of continuous assault, but finally, the door buckled and fell. Beyond it was a corridor filled with guards. The guards opened fire immediately. Plasma bolts and projectile rounds filled the air, but Kareth was done being a victim. He was done being a prisoner. He moved through the guards like a force of nature, his rage finally given a target that deserved it. Margaret stayed back with the other prisoners, directing them to safety. She treated the wounded as best she could with no supplies. She kept everyone calm and organized. It was what she did best. The fighting was brief, but intense. The guards hadn't expected a full riot. Part 4. The Warden's Trap. The communication center was located in the central tower of HFY 7, 3 levels above the main prison complex. Kareth and Margaret led their group of freed prisoners through darkened corridors, fighting past scattered guards who were too shocked to mount an effective defense. News of the dragon's escape had spread panic throughout the facility. Margaret's arm was still bleeding from the earlier wound, but she ignored the pain. She had treated dozens of injuries among their group, working with supplies they had stolen from the medical wing. Kor carried a bag full of bandages and medicine, following her instructions to help whoever needed it. They reached the tower's main entrance. The doors were sealed, and a message flashed on the screen above them. Central tower lockdown in effect. Authorization required. Crix, the Synthian tech expert, moved forward with the equipment they had scavenged. His 4 hands worked quickly across multiple data pads, trying to bypass the security. This will take time. The encryption is military grade. How much time? Kareth asked. 10 minutes, maybe 15. Kareth looked at Margaret. They both knew what was coming. Thex wouldn't let them reach the communication center without a fight. Set up defensive positions. Margaret ordered the other prisoners. Use whatever we have. Block the corridors. We hold this position until Crix gets us through. The prisoners moved quickly. They had learned to trust Margaret's judgment. Furniture was dragged into place. Weapons were distributed. Some prisoners who had military experience took command of small groups. Within minutes, they had created a makeshift fortress around the tower entrance. It wasn't enough. Margaret knew it wasn't enough, but it was all they had. The attack came 5 minutes later. Not guards this time, but combat drones. Dozens of them, flying through the corridors with weapons armed and targeting systems active. These were military-grade machines designed to suppress prison riots with maximum efficiency. Take cover, Kareth roared. The drones opened fire. Energy weapons lit up the darkness. Prisoners scrambled for cover behind their barricades. Several weren't fast enough. Margaret heard screams and forced herself not to look. She needed to focus on the living. Kareth met the drones head-on. His fire could melt their armor. His claws could tear through their chassis. But there were too many. For every one he destroyed, 2 more appeared. Margaret watched the battle, her mind racing. Drones had predictable programming. They followed patterns. If she could identify those patterns, they could exploit them. They're targeting the largest threats first, she shouted to Kareth. They see you as the primary danger. We can use that. How? Kareth destroyed another drone but took a hit to his shoulder. You draw them in. Get them to cluster. Then we collapse the ceiling on them. It was risky. If they brought down the ceiling, they might trap themselves. But they didn't have many options. Kareth trusted Margaret's judgment. He had learned she was usually right. Kareth moved to the center of the corridor, making himself an obvious target. The drones swarmed toward him, their programming demanding they eliminate the greatest threat. Kareth let them get close, enduring their fire, waiting for the right moment. Now, Margaret shouted. Kareth unleashed his fire at the ceiling supports. The metal, already weakened by decades of poor maintenance, melted and buckled. The ceiling came down with a deafening crash, burying most of the drones under tons of debris. The few that survived were quickly destroyed by the prisoners. The corridor was blocked now, buying them precious time. But Margaret saw that Kareth was badly hurt. Burns and cuts covered his body. He was bleeding from multiple wounds. Even his remarkable healing couldn't keep up with this level of damage. Let me treat you, Margaret said, moving to his side. There's no time. Then we make time. You're no good to anyone if you collapse from blood loss. Kareth sat down heavily. Margaret worked quickly, using the medical supplies they had. Her hands were steady despite the chaos around them. She cleaned his wounds and applied bandages, knowing it wasn't enough but doing what she could. While she worked, a voice echoed through the corridor's speaker system. Commander Thex, Margaret Hayes, prisoner X-771, I'm impressed. You've made it further than I expected. But this ends now. Margaret ignored him and continued working on Kareth's wounds. Thex continued, his voice filled with false pleasantness. I'm prepared to make you a deal. A real one this time. Give yourselves up and I'll let the other prisoners go. They can return to their cells. No punishment. No executions. Just you two in exchange for 200 lives. That's a nurse's dream, isn't it? Sacrificing yourself to save others? Margaret's hands paused. She looked at the prisoners around her. Korzira, Crix, and so many others. They were looking at her, waiting to see what she would do. Don't listen to him, Core said. He's lying. He'll kill us all anyway. Probably, Margaret agreed. But what if he's not? What if there's a chance to save your lives? Kareth's hand closed gently around her wrist. You would sacrifice yourself for strangers? They're not strangers anymore. They're patients. They're people I care about. Margaret smiled sadly. Besides, I'm 67 years old. I've lived a full life. Most of them are young. They deserve a chance at freedom. No. Kareth's voice was firm. We don't surrender. We don't sacrifice ourselves to cruel men who will break their promises. We fight, Zira spoke up. He's right. We all chose to follow you, Margaret. Not because you promised us safety, but because you showed us dignity. Don't insult us by thinking we'd accept freedom bought with your life. The other prisoners nodded in agreement. They had made their choice. They would rather die fighting alongside Margaret and Kareth than live as prisoners again. Margaret felt tears in her eyes. She had spent 40 years in prisons, treating people who society had deemed worthless, and here they were, ready to die for her. It was humbling and heartbreaking and beautiful all at once. Then we fight, she said, and we don't stop fighting until we're free or we're dead. Thex's voice came back over the speaker, angry now. So be it, I gave you a chance. What happens next is your fault. The lights went out. Emergency systems kicked in, bathing everything in red. Then they heard it. A sound like thunder, like an earthquake. Something massive was moving through the prison toward them. What is that? Crix asked nervously. Kareth's eyes widened. A Titan-class security bot. I've heard stories about them. The Empire uses them to put down major rebellions. How do we fight it? Margaret asked. You don't. You run. But there was nowhere to run. The corridor behind them was blocked by debris. The door to the tower was still locked. They were trapped. The Titan-class bot rounded the corner. It was 20 feet tall, covered in armor plating, with weapons mounted on every surface. Its optical sensors glowed red in the darkness. It was designed to kill efficiently and without mercy. The prisoners opened fire with every weapon they had. The projectiles bounced harmlessly off the Titan's armor. Its weapons charged up, ready to return fire. Margaret's mind raced. There had to be a weakness. Every machine had a weakness. She thought about the medical drones she had worked with, about the combat drones they had just fought. All machines needed cooling systems. All machines generated heat, Kareth, she said urgently. It's cooling vents. They'll be underneath, where they're protected but still need airflow. If you can get under it and pour fire into those vents, you might overload its core. That requires getting close. Very close, I know. But it's the only chance we have. Kareth looked at the Titan, then at Margaret. If I do this and it works, you need to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll escape this place. Promise me you'll tell the galaxy what happened here. Promise me that my people and your people and all the others who suffered, that their stories won't be forgotten. Margaret grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. We're both getting out of here, both of us. I didn't save your life just to watch you throw it away. Kareth laughed, a harsh sound. You're stubborn for someone so small. It's my best quality. The Titan opened fire. Energy bolts tore through the barricades. Prisoners scattered, trying to avoid the devastation. Kareth charged forward, moving low and fast. The Titan tried to track him, but he was too quick, too close to its base. Kareth slid underneath the massive machine, found the cooling vents, and breathed fire directly into them. The Titan's core temperature spiked immediately. Warning alarms blared from its speakers. It tried to move away, to shake Kareth off, but he held on, continuing to pour fire into its vulnerable systems. The core overloaded. The Titan seized up, its systems failing one by one. Then it collapsed, its massive weight crashing to the floor. Kareth barely rolled clear in time. He lay on the ground, exhausted and burned. Margaret ran to him despite the danger. Are you alive? Unfortunately, yes. Being alive hurts. Margaret couldn't help but laugh. Even near death, Kareth kept his grim humor. Behind them, Crick shouted, I'm through. The door is opening. The tower entrance slid open, revealing a long staircase leading upward. They had made it. They had actually made it, but Kareth couldn't stand. His injuries were too severe. He had pushed himself beyond his limits to destroy the Titan. Margaret looked at him, then at the stairs and made a decision. Core, Zira, help me carry him. He's too heavy, Core protested. Then we get more help. We don't leave anyone behind. Anne. Part 5, The Message. The communication array hummed with power as Crix worked the controls. Multiple screens showed connection confirmations from across the galaxy. News networks, military channels, civilian broadcasts. Their message was reaching everywhere at once. Margaret stood in front of the main camera. She was covered in dirt and blood. Her hair had come loose from its bun. She looked exhausted and old and completely ordinary. She looked like what she was, a tired nurse who had seen too much suffering, and that was exactly why people would believe her. "My name is Margaret Hayes," she began. Her voice was steady despite her fear. "I am a human, a nurse, and for the past week I have been a prisoner on Vexar 7. But I'm not here to talk about my imprisonment. I'm here to talk about the crimes that the Corinthian Empire has been committing for centuries." Behind her, Kareth lay on the floor, badly wounded but still alive. The other prisoners stood around the room, their faces visible to the cameras. "Different species, all bearing the marks of torture and abuse," Margaret continued. "The Empire tells you that certain species are extinct. They tell you that the Varathians were monsters who had to be destroyed. They tell you that species like the Drexians, the Vexians, the Thros, they're all gone, wiped out in justified wars. But it's a lie. They're not extinct. They're here. They're alive. And they're being tortured in secret facilities across the galaxy." She gestured to Kareth. "This is Kareth, son of Vareth. He is a Varathian warrior who has been imprisoned for 200 years. They chained him. They tortured him. They tried to break him. But he survived. And he's not alone." The screens shifted to show the footage Crix had pulled from the prison's security systems. Images of cells filled with prisoners from supposedly extinct species. Medical facilities where experiments were conducted. Trading records showing prisoners being sold to weapons manufacturers and research corporations. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Margaret's voice grew stronger. "The Corinthian Empire has been lying to you. They haven't been protecting the galaxy from dangerous species. They've been enslaving anyone who refuses to bow to their rule. And when those species fight back, the Empire declares them extinct and continues to exploit them in secret." She looked directly into the camera. "I am a nurse. I have spent 40 years treating prisoners. I have seen the suffering that the Empire causes. And I am telling you now, this has to stop. The galaxy deserves to know the truth." The broadcast reached millions of worlds simultaneously. On human colonies, people gathered around screens in shock. On Corinthian worlds, officials scrambled to shut down the transmission. But it was too late. The message had spread too far, too fast. On neutral worlds, governments convened emergency sessions. And on enslaved worlds, hope began to flicker. In the communication center, alarms began blaring. Thex had finally managed to override the door locks remotely. Heavy footsteps echoed from the stairwell. He was coming with whatever forces he had left. "How much longer?" Margaret asked Crix. "The message is out. It's spreading through every network in the galaxy. They can't stop it now." Crix looked at the data streaming across his screens. "Margaret, you need to see this." He pulled up incoming messages. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Ships were changing course, heading toward Vexar 7. Some were military vessels. Others were civilian transports. News crews. Independent investigators. Even some Corinthian ships whose crews had decided to defect after seeing the broadcast. "Help is coming," Crix said with wonder in his voice. "The whole galaxy is responding, but help would take time to arrive." The nearest ship was still hours away, and Thex was coming now. The doors burst open. Thex entered with 20 heavily armed guards. His pleasant mask was gone. His face was twisted with rage. "You've destroyed everything. Decades of profits, years of careful planning, all gone because of you." Margaret stepped forward, placing herself between Thex and the wounded prisoners. "Good. You deserve to lose everything." Thex raised his weapon. "You'll die for this." "Maybe, but it was worth it." Kareth stirred on the floor. With a massive effort, he pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. He was barely conscious, his body failing from his injuries, but he had enough strength for one last act. He roared. It wasn't a roar of pain or anger. It was a challenge, a warning. The sound of a Varathian warrior who refused to die quietly. The guards hesitated. They had heard stories about what happened when Varathians were cornered. Some of them began backing toward the door. Thex screamed at his guards. "Shoot them! Shoot them all!" But before anyone could fire, the building shook. A deep rumbling sound filled the air. Crix checked his screens and started laughing. A ship just entered the atmosphere. A big one. They're not waiting for permission to land. The ceiling exploded inward. A military transport, battered and old but still functional, crashed through the roof of the communication center. Its boarding ramp dropped and people poured out. They wore makeshift armor and carried whatever weapons they could find. And at their front was a woman in a captain's uniform. Her name was Elena Brooks. She was human in her mid-30s with short dark hair and sharp eyes. She was also a former prisoner of Vexar 7 who had escaped 3 months ago. "Sorry we're late," Elena said. She saw Margaret and smiled. "I saw your broadcast. Figured you could use some backup." "How did you get here so fast?" Margaret asked. "We were already on our way. Been planning a raid on this place for weeks. Your message just gave us the perfect cover." Elena looked at Thex and her smile turned cold. "Commander Thex, I've been looking forward to this." Thex tried to run. He didn't make it 3 steps before Elena's people grabbed him. The guards threw down their weapons and surrendered. They knew when a fight was lost. Elena's crew immediately began helping the prisoners. Medics rushed to treat Kareth and the others who were wounded. Engineers secured the communication array. Soldiers established a defensive perimeter. Elena knelt beside Margaret. "You did it. You actually exposed them." "We did it," Margaret corrected. "All of us together. The Empire is already issuing denials. But with this much evidence, they can't hide anymore. Rebellions are starting on a dozen worlds. More ships are on their way here. This place is about to become very crowded." Margaret looked at Kareth. The medics were working on him and his vital signs were stabilizing. He would live. They had both survived. "There's more," Margaret said. "Thex told me there are other facilities like this one. Research stations where they're keeping prisoners from extinct species. We found coordinates for one of them. Research Station Helios 9. Elena's eyes lit up. "If we could raid that station, free those prisoners, it would prove your broadcast was true beyond any doubt." "That's what I was thinking. It's also incredibly dangerous. The Empire will be on high alert now. Security will be tripled. We might not make it back." Margaret looked around the room at the freed prisoners. They were exhausted, wounded, traumatized, but they were alive, and they were free. If she stopped now, if she didn't push forward, those people in the research station would continue to suffer. "I'm going," Margaret said. "I'm a nurse. Those people need medical help, and I'm going to make sure they get it." Elena studied her for a moment. "You know, when I first heard about the old woman who survived a week with the dragon, I thought it was just a rumor. But seeing you now, I believe it. You're tougher than you look." "I've had a lot of practice over the next few hours." More ships arrived at Vexar 7. News crews broadcast live from the prison, showing the galaxy the truth that had been hidden for so long. Human ships came, so did vessels from neutral worlds. Even some Corinthian ships arrived, their crews refusing to follow orders from an empire they no longer believed in. The prison was transformed. What had been a place of suffering became a symbol of resistance. Freed prisoners gave interviews telling their stories. The evidence was examined by independent investigators, and with each passing hour, the Empire's denials became less believable. Kareth recovered slowly. Margaret stayed by his side, monitoring his healing. His body's adaptation abilities were remarkable. Wounds that should have killed him were already closing, but he needed rest. "You're planning to go to the research station," Kareth said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, Elena is putting together a strike team. We leave in 2 days. I'm coming with you." "No, you need to heal." "You nearly died." Kareth's golden eyes blazed. "My daughter might be there. If there are Varathians being held at that station, Sareth could be among them. I thought she died 200 years ago. If there's any chance she's alive, I have to find her." Margaret understood. She would have done the same in his position. "Then you heal. You rest, you eat. You do everything I tell you to do. And if you're strong enough in 2 days, you can come." Agreed. Elena's strike team grew quickly. Freed prisoners volunteered to help. Defected soldiers brought their skills. Elena herself was a brilliant tactician who had been imprisoned for leading a failed colony rebellion. She knew how to fight the Empire. They planned carefully. Research Station Helios 9 was in a remote system, 3 days' travel from Vexar 7. It was lightly defended because it was secret. But after the broadcast, security would be increased. They would have one chance to get in and get everyone out. Margaret spent her time treating patients and preparing medical supplies. She would be going into a facility. Part 6. Research Station. Helios 9, the research station, hung in the darkness of space like a forgotten secret. It was smaller than Vexar 7, designed to be overlooked. From the outside, it looked like a mining facility. But the scans told a different story. Heavy shielding, military-grade weapons, and life signs. Thousands of them. Elena studied the data on her command screen. Her ship, a modified cargo hauler called the Liberty Bell, floated at the edge of the system. 2 other ships from their strike team flanked them. 30 volunteers ready to fight. It didn't feel like enough. Security is lighter than I expected, Elena said. They're probably scrambling to move prisoners after Margaret's broadcast went public. That gives us a window. Margaret stood beside her, looking at the station. Somewhere inside were people who needed help. People who had been suffering for years, maybe centuries. She thought about Kareth's daughter, Sareth. She thought about all the families torn apart by the Empire's lies. What's the plan? Margaret asked, fast and hard. We breach the hull here. Elena pointed to a section of the station, where their shielding is weakest. My team secures the control center. Your medical team finds the prisoners. Kareth leads a group to the detention blocks. We have 15 minutes before their distress signal reaches the nearest Imperial fleet. 30 minutes after that, warships arrive. So we need to be gone in 45 minutes total. That's not much time. It's what we have. The strike team gathered in the Liberty Bell's cargo bay. They wore salvaged armor and carried weapons taken from Vexar 7. Margaret had her medical kit and a small sidearm she barely knew how to use. Kareth stood beside her, fully armored now, looking like the warrior he had once been. Remember, Elena addressed the group, we're not here to fight the Empire. We're here to rescue prisoners. Get in, get them out, get gone. If you have to choose between fighting and running, you run. These people have suffered enough. Let's not add to their suffering by dying unnecessarily. The ships moved in. The Liberty Bell's cutting laser carved through the station's hull. Alarms immediately began blaring inside. The element of surprise was gone, but they were committed now. Margaret's team went through the breach first. The interior of the station was sterile and cold. White walls, bright lights, the smell of chemicals. It looked like a hospital, but Margaret knew better. She had seen enough medical facilities to recognize when one was designed for healing and when it was designed for something else. They found the first prisoners 3 corridors in, a dozen Vexians held in cells that were too small for their bodies. They were thin and weak, covered in surgical scars. When they saw the rescue team, some of them cried. Others just stared, unable to believe this was real. Margaret's medical team quickly assessed their condition: malnutrition, experimental surgeries, neural implants that would need to be carefully removed. But they were alive. They could be saved. Can you walk? Margaret asked the strongest-looking Vexian. Yes, slowly. Then walk. We're getting you out of here. They moved through the station, finding more prisoners in every section. Drexians, Thros. Species Margaret had never seen before. All of them bore the signs of experimentation. All of them had been told they were the last of their kind. The joy and relief on their faces when they learned others survived was heartbreaking. Kareth's team reached the detention blocks. The cells here were different, stronger, designed to hold the most dangerous prisoners. And in the largest cell he found her, Sareth, his daughter. She was alive, but she had been changed. Cybernetic implants covered parts of her body. Her wings had been replaced with mechanical ones. Her eyes glowed with an artificial light. They had turned her into a weapon, a thing to be used and controlled. Father? Her voice was uncertain, as if she couldn't trust what she was seeing. Kareth's hands shook as he tore open the cell door. Sareth, I thought you were dead. I thought I had lost you. She collapsed into his arms and they both wept. 200 years of separation. 200 years of believing the other was gone. And now, impossibly, they were together again. But there was no time for reunion. Alarms were blaring. Guards were responding. They had to move. Elena's team had taken the control center, but they were pinned down by security forces. The station's commander had activated all combat protocols. Automated defenses were coming online. The carefully planned 15-minute operation was falling apart. Margaret coordinated the evacuation over the communication channels. Her medical training had taught her to stay calm in emergencies, and she used that skill now. She organized the freed prisoners into groups, assigned guides to each group, and plotted the fastest routes back to the ships. Elena, we need more time, Margaret said into her communicator. I'm giving you everything I can, but we've got heavy resistance here. They're sending everything they have at the control center. Can you reach the station's self-destruct? There was a pause. Yes, but that's not the plan, Margaret. Plans change. If we trigger the self-destruct, they'll have to evacuate. That will pull their forces away from us and give us the time we need. It will also mean anyone we don't rescue dies when the station explodes. Margaret felt the weight of that decision. She was a nurse. She had spent her life saving people. But right now she had to accept that she couldn't save everyone. The people they had already found needed her to get them to safety. The people they hadn't found yet, there was no time. Do it, Margaret said. Set it for 30 minutes. That gives us time to get out and gives them time to evacuate their people. Elena triggered the self-destruct. Warning lights flashed throughout the station. An automated voice announced the evacuation order. Guards abandoned their posts and ran for the escape pods. The resistance at the control center collapsed as soldiers chose survival over duty. The strike team moved quickly. Margaret's group reached the breach point with 83 rescued prisoners. They were loading them onto the ships when she realized Kareth hadn't checked in. "Kareth, where are you?" she called over the communicator. His voice came back, strained. "I found more Varathians. 20 of them. But the detention block is damaged. The doors won't open. Then leave them. We're out of time. No, I won't abandon my people again." Margaret cursed. She looked at the rescued prisoners loading onto the ships, then at her medical team. "Get them out of here. I'm going back for Kareth." "Margaret, no." Elena protested over the communicator. "He saved my life. I'm saving his. Just be ready to leave the moment we get back." Margaret ran back into the station. The corridors were empty now, everyone fleeing for the escape pods. The self-destruct countdown was at 20 minutes. The walls shook with small explosions as systems failed. She found Kareth in the detention block, trying to tear through a reinforced door. Behind it she could see the Varathians he had mentioned. They were all cybernetically modified like Sareth, weapons experiments. "Living tools, the door is too strong," Kareth said desperately. "I can't break through." Margaret examined the door. It was electronic, controlled by the station's central computer. But the self-destruct had disrupted many systems. She pulled out her medical scanner and used it to interface with the door's controls. It was a trick she had learned years ago, a way to access locked medical supply cabinets in emergencies. The scanner wasn't designed for this, but it was smart technology. It adapted, just like humans adapted. The door clicked and began to open. The Varathians poured out. Kareth quickly explained the situation. They had minutes to reach the ships. They ran through the failing station, supporting those who were too weak to run on their own. 15 minutes until detonation. They reached the main corridor. 10 minutes. They saw the breach point ahead. 5 minutes. They were almost there. Then a section of ceiling collapsed in front of them, blocking the path. The station was falling apart faster than expected. They were trapped. Margaret looked around frantically. There had to be another way. She checked her scanner, looking at the station's layout. There was a maintenance shaft 2 corridors over. It would take them to the exterior of the station. They could do a short spacewalk to reach the breach point. "This way," she shouted. They found the maintenance shaft. It was narrow, barely large enough for Kareth and the other Varathians to squeeze through. 3 minutes until detonation. They climbed through,